You were a backer of Kash Patel for FBI director.
Yeah, I mean, I lobbied Trump on it.
Why? And what do you think? Why do you think it's a good idea that he's going to run the FBI?
So I was deeply concerned about, people. Somewhere inside of Trump world, someone was pushing Mike Rogers, which I thought was a terrible mistake.
Who's Mike Rogers?
Former FBI agent, was running for Senate, was a member of the House. Former FBI, was a member of the House, I think Intel Committee, then was running for Senate this time around, lost narrowly, and then someone was pushing him to be FBI director, which I think was the wrong take by like a country mile. You don't need an institutionalist to go in and run what I think is one of the most corrupt institutions in our country today. And I told Trump, I was like, as much as you need a loyalist running DOJ, times 100 running the FBI. It's a pit of vipers. And you need somebody like Kash Patel. We talked about Rick Renaud, Kash Patel. But you need somebody that's going to go in there and be fearless to say, we are not doing this anymore. In fact, I would kind of like, I know Kash has said this, again, we'll see what happens, but he said that day one he'd shut it down and turn it into a museum for the deep state. The FBI in its current form, its current iteration, needs to cease to exist. And I think Kash Patel has not only the intelligence and the skills.
Who's going to commit terror
courage.
Attacks if we don't have an FBI?
Yeah, I know. This to me, I think we have to. What has been the point of the FBI? They started 1908, I think, is when they originated. What are they actually doing? What is their purpose right now? Besides being,
I don't know,
Praetorian Guard for the administrative state, right? And looking at potential people like Donald Trump as existential threats and trying to destroy them. Mm-hmm. What? And then we continue to fund it blindly. This is writ large with our government administrative state. What I find one of the most interesting things about Republicans today, and have for, quite frankly, years, elect me. I'm going to go to D.C. I'm going to change D.C. They get to D.C. They accept budget recommendations from these very department and agencies, go ahead and pass those, fund them, do these 4,000 or 5,000 page bills, send them over to the bureaucrats who, with their statutes and regulations, actually put a fine point on how this is actually going to look in reality. So they're doing the real governing. So they've not only given them all the funding without any real oversight, they just give it to them. They've then subdelegated their legislative authority to these unelected bureaucrats, and then go home and say, you need to send me back. I know those people at the EPA or the FDA made some terrible regulations that are ruining your lives, but send me back. I'll fight the system. And I'll make sure that doesn't happen again as they get reelected, to then fund those people again, to then send them forward 5,000 page bills, to then do the statutes and regulations that actually govern us. The whole system is completely bonkers. And it's actually very beneficial to most of these elected representatives.
Yeah.
Experts in self-preservation, because they don't have to make the hard choices. They don't actually have to do the really hard decisions on legislating, because the statutes and regulations that have the binding effect of laws is what's being done over here in the Article 2 branch by these administrative state bureaucrats. At some point, I do have some hope that we're going to have a chance, not only with Donald Trump, but the Supreme Court. The last summer, there were a couple cases that I think gave us real hope.
Yes.
It was not only Chevron deference, where the Supreme Court said,
my favorite case,
40 years, this is a disaster. We're not going to have judicial deference to these bureaucrats. Regulations and statutes. I think the other one that wasn't discussed as much that should have been is when the Supreme Court said the SEC tribunals, you can't have those anymore. You can't have, the SEC cannot have its own private administrative law tribunal in which 90% of the time that SEC tribunal ruled in favor of the SEC. The Supreme Court said, first of all, it calls into question the idea of an independent judiciary, because you're taking the judicial role inside the Article 2 branch, not the Article 3, and you've annihilated our Seventh Amendment, which is right to trial by jury. We're not going to do this anymore. Which was, by the way, I mean, you look at some of these things that we're dealing with today and look at where the founders started. They wanted an independent judiciary because they saw what the British courts were doing in rubber stamping King George III and his ministers and Parliament's edicts that they viewed as very deeply unfair to them, but they were just acting as a rubber stamp. So they said, we're going to have an independent judiciary. And then with the administrative state, obviously it's annihilated the separation of powers, and you have the Article 2 branch doing a lot of the legislative and a lot of judicial. I think Supreme Court stepping up and saying we're not going to do this anymore is another step in the right direction. But at some point, I would hope that members of Congress would find it within themselves to have just the smallest bit of political courage to say, I'm not going to blindly fund this stuff anymore. And that's a step in the right direction. For example, with the FBI. We're not going to do this anymore. we can't do this anymore for our own sakes, for the sake of the country.
I think it's be important for the White House to lead on issues like that. Like,
it is.
Just how about no? How about no?
I would very much like Donald Trump to say the FBI does not deserve a new headquarters.
Yeah, that and a lot of other issues, just like
Just make statements.
Yeah, exactly. What happens to Kamala Harris now?
Where does she go from here?
Yeah. Where does she go? I know you're not a Democrat, but
the ash heap of history.
But typically you run for president and you lose on the Democratic side, and you get John Kerry's our climate czar, I guess, right? And there's always a soft landing for the loser.
I don't think so. Not for her.
Tell me.
I think she was such a disaster. They got stuck. I mean, first of all, they boxed themselves into a corner of their own making.
Yes.
Right. They knew Joe Biden.
They got a DEI candidate and they lived with the results.
Right. And then all of a sudden realized in June, this isn't going to cut it.
I'm glad they didn't make her like a commercial airplane pilot. America got out pretty easy.
Right. We did. And I think they got stuck and they realized this is the only horse we've got to ride. They tried to pull it off. It looked for a couple of weeks, maybe they've got a shot. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, obviously, the reality of who she is.
Yep.
A lightweight, intellectually a lightweight, so far in over her head. It's clear that she's just been going up the ranks as a DEI advancement for her whole life.
Yes.
I think they're going to be very happy for her to fade off into obscurity. I mean, all this. I saw some.
You feel sorry for her at all?
I do not at all.
I kind of do. Maybe I'm the liberal here, but I feel like she's a victim of self-esteem culture, and I think
she's allowed herself to be that, though.
She had no.
I mean, she's been a beneficiary of it. She's had.
She became vice president of the United States.
Well, I'm saying based off, being completely honest, based off her talents or lack thereof, or her skill sets, whatever. She's had a pretty freaking good life.
No, she had. No, you're
great
absolutely
life.
Right. But imagine
far above and beyond what she should have done.
Yeah, no, you're right. But that's true. But she's also just a vessel for the ambitions of others. Like she's almost like an innocent bystander, kidnapped off the street, just human trafficked into her current position. Do you know what I mean? It's like you just look like the kind of person.
I don't know if I've ever heard it described that way.
No,
I'm gonna have to think about that.
I'm a liberal, but she's so dumb. And you just could, what is that phrase they use? Imposter syndrome?
Yes.
Where you sort of know that you're not qualified to be doing what you're doing. And people say they feel that way, but her whole life was that.
She has no future in national politics.
Oh, for sure. So will she be the head of the douchebag foundation or wherever they sort of put people like that?
I don't know. I really don't.
Not, right?
It feels like she has completely even though she's still, vice president for a few more weeks, it feels like she has already been relegated to obscurity, and I think that's going to be the rest of her. Yeah, it's going to be the rest of her existence. I'm sure that somewhere someone will find her a nice gig at a foundation, but I think this is the last time you're going to see any serious conversation about her.
I think they should be required to keep her in the public eye, like George Floyd. I always felt like once we declared him Jesus. I don't know if you remember that. I wanted to keep talking about George Floyd.
Right.
Like, why don't we have George Floyd Day?
Right.
Like, let's talk about his porn career.
I think
his drug addiction and his armed robbery conviction.
I think they're more than happy for her to just simply fade away. Into
so I don't think they should be allowed to do that. I don't think they should be allowed to memory hole Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Like, she should have to explain how her first name is pronounced and why she doesn't do so consistently. I think she should be forced to talk a lot more, just to like make them live, like make the dog return to his vomit.
Right.
That's what we should make them do.
We should.
Like, where is Kamala Harris? She's like the greatest joy spreader this country's ever seen. How did she disappear?
I think they will do everything that they can to avoid that. I think they will do everything they can to make sure that we never have a conversation about her again.
She should be president of Harvard. I think, no, I'm serious. You should take their most beloved institution, the most rotten, corrupt, disgusting, overrated,
You should start a petition on this.
For real. Like, she's such a genius. She's so incredibly accomplished. She's the most accomplished woman who ever ran for president. She should be required to be the head of Harvard. How great would that be?
I like that.
Yes.
Sure, let's do it. We could start a campaign together.
Don't you think?
Let's do it.
But in real life, like, she's just going to fade.
She's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's gone.
What about Jill Biden?
Dr. Jill?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be sexist. She has an education degree from the University of North Delaware or whatever.
You mean our first female president?
Yeah.
Come on. I think the scary part The scary part to me over the last 4 years is that we knew, some of us knew sooner than others, but I think a lot of people knew this guy had early cognitive decline. He was already in some stage of dementia.
His sister was telling people I know that
from pretty much day one
for president.
Right, from pretty much day one of him being sworn in. I mean, this to me is one of the great scandals of, I don't know, however many generations of political history.
Ever, yeah.
That we had Joe Biden in the White House in cognitive decline, early dementia, whatever you want to call it, who was actually running the country for 4 years. I mean, this to me is like it's a Woodrow Wilson replay, right? Where his wife and his chief of staff were actually running most of
Tony Blinken, I think, was running.
You think Blinken?
I do.
Yeah.
But certainly the meaningful parts of the...
And then everybody covered it up.
Yeah, I know.
Like, wait.
Joe Scarborough, this is the greatest version of Biden ever.
So, yeah, Dr. Jill, our first female president, should have a bright future in front of her, whatever she wants to do. And
the one thing I always liked, well, there were actually, honestly, a couple of things I always liked about Hunter Biden. I know you're not supposed to say it, but, I knew him well, and I always kind of liked him. And drug addiction was he became a monster because of cocaine and pills, as many do. But he hated her.
Really?
Oh, he thought she was a screaming bitch. And he said so in person, and he said so in writing on his laptop. Oh, yeah. He said that she was a bitch and stupid. And I think that's a fair assessment from someone who spent his life living with her. Like he would, if anyone would know what Dr. Jill is really like, it's her stepson, Hunter, who started dating his dad when he was like 4 or something. So, and I don't know why Republicans didn't make more of that. And everyone wanted to focus on the crack and the toe sucking and everything, but Dr. Jill is stupid and a bitch.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was great.